At some point in childhood, you stopped being a kid and started being responsible for the mood in the room, for your parents' feelings, for keeping things together. That has a clinical name, and lifelong consequences. And if you grew up feeling older than you were, more serious, more careful, more tuned in to everyone else's emotional state than any child should have to be, this video is going to explain something about your adult life that has probably never been fully explained to you before. For a lot of people, it didn't feel like a burden at the time. It just felt like who they were. You were the one adults described as an old soul, mature for your age, so responsible. And you wore that as identity, because it was the identity that got you seen, that got you praised, that made you feel like you had a place and a purpose in a home that maybe needed steadying. But look closer at what that actually meant. It meant you learned to read the room before you knew how to read a book. You monitored the emotional temperature of the adults around you and adjusted yourself accordingly. Quieter when they were stressed, funnier when they needed lightening, smaller when things were tense. You became, without anyone asking directly, the emotional regulator of people who were supposed to be regulating themselves. You had opinions, wants, fears, confusions of your own, but those felt secondary. Sometimes they felt dangerous because there wasn't room, because the adults around you were already using all of it. So you folded yourself inward, kept the surface calm, and got very, very good at being okay. What you're describing is called parentification, and it is one of the most quietly damaging childhood experiences precisely because it looks, from the outside, like a strength. It happens when a child takes on emotional or practical responsibilities that belong to the adults in the home. Not dramatically, not through abuse in its most recognizable forms, sometimes through a parent who was struggling with mental health, with grief, with their own unresolved pain, and who leaned on their child, consciously or not, to carry some of that weight. The child learns to give what they needed to receive, and they carry that pattern in almost every relationship into adult life. Children are wired to attach. Safety, belonging, love, these are not optional for a developing mind. They are survival. So when a child senses that the adults around them are emotionally fragile or overwhelmed, they do what all attached creatures do: they adapt. They suppress their own needs to protect the relationship. They become attuned, hypervigilant even, to shifts in mood, tension, the specific way a door closes or a silence lands. And because this attunement works, because it does keep the peace, does earn approval, does make the home feel safer, the brain encodes it as the right strategy. Being attuned, being responsible, putting others first, this becomes not a choice, but an instinct. The cost is that the child never fully experiences being the one who is tended to, never fully learns that their needs are not a burden, never internalizes the foundational belief that they are allowed to take up space, not because of what they manage or carry or provide, but simply because they exist. In adult life, it shows up in ways that feel completely normal to you, because they have always been normal for you. You are the one who senses tension before anyone else does and tries to dissolve it. You find it almost instinctive to manage other people's emotions, to soften your words before speaking, to check how the other person might feel before expressing what you feel. You give people more understanding than they have earned, because extending understanding is what you learn to do instead of making demands. You are terrible at asking for help, not because you are proud, but because needing something triggers an old, deep discomfort. A sense that your needs will be inconvenient, that they'll shift the atmosphere, that asking will cost you something relationally you can't afford to lose. You attract people who need you, and you stay, often longer than you should, because being needed is the closest thing your nervous system knows to being loved. Engagement moment, I want to ask you something direct. Growing up, was there ever a moment where you felt more responsible for a parent's emotional state than they were? You don't have to have a dramatic story. It can be small. If it resonates, tell me in the comments. Even just yes is enough. The long-term cost of this pattern is not always obvious, because from the outside, parentified adults often look like they're doing remarkably well. They are capable, emotionally intelligent, reliable. They are the person everyone turns to. But underneath that competence is a person who never fully learned that they were allowed to be turned to themselves. It costs them an intimacy. Real vulnerability, the kind that requires letting someone else do the caring, feels deeply uncomfortable. So relationships stay slightly imbalanced. They give more than they receive and call it love when it is partly fear. It costs them in identity. So much of who they are was built around function, around what they do for others, that when you remove that function, they don't quite know what's left. Rest feels purposeless. Stillness feels like failure. And it costs them in their relationship with their own emotions. Years of managing everyone else's feelings leaves very little practice in sitting with their own. You didn't grow up too fast because you were strong. You grew up too fast because you were needed, and love had already taught you that the safest way to stay close to someone was to make yourself useful to them. That is not strength. That is a child doing the only thing they could think of to keep the people they loved from drifting away. And somewhere inside you, that child is still doing it. In every relationship, in every room, every time someone else's discomfort becomes your responsibility to fix. You were not born to manage other people. You were trained to. And that is a crucial difference, because training is not destiny. The attunement, the empathy, the emotional intelligence that came out of all of this, those are genuinely yours. They are real strengths, but they were built in the service of survival, not freedom. And you are allowed now to start deciding whose emotional world you are actually responsible for. The answer is one person, yours. 3 things that begin to move this, slowly and honestly. First, practice having needs out loud. Small ones to start. Ask for what you want at dinner. Say when you're tired instead of pushing through. Name a feeling before you manage it away. Each small act of honest need is a direct counter-message to the belief that having needs makes you a burden. Second, notice when you're managing rather than connecting. In conversation, when you feel the pull to soften, redirect, fix the mood, pause and ask, am I doing this for them or to protect myself from the discomfort of the moment? That distinction changes everything about the choice that follows. Third, let yourself be cared for without deflecting it. When someone offers genuine care, attention, concern, real presence, try staying in it longer than feels comfortable. Don't redirect to them, don't minimize, just receive it. That practice, repeated, starts to rewire the belief that care flows only one direction. You spent years being the stable one, the responsible one, the one who held it together so that everyone else didn't have to. You were good at it. You still are. But somewhere underneath all of that competence is a version of you that never got to be young, never got to be uncertain, never got to need without immediately feeling guilty for it. That version of you is not gone. It is just waiting for you to finally stop managing long enough to let it exist. If this named something you've never had the words for, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe for more of this. Every week, we go beneath the surface of the patterns that quietly shape everything. No platitudes, no quick fixes, just the real psychology. And leave me a comment with this. What's one thing you wish someone had taken care of for you when you were young? You don't have to explain it. Just say the thing. See you next week.